the webinar. So it's now available for everyone. And I will be sharing the screen so that everybody sees the PowerPoint presentation, which everyone on the panel worked on creating. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce the panel to everyone. Christine Smith is on. She was our facilitator at the conference. Roberta Bukowski and Megan Neo, and then myself as Don McCrabb. We do want to encourage you to participate in the webinar. This is like a lecture in the sense that it's a big auditorium type thing. So the best way for you to participate is by using the Q&A. So there's a Q&A function, or there's a chat function. Feel free to use those, and that will we can then engage your questions as we move through the webinar. Also, we do want you to inhabit this space. Just be present to this time. Try not to multitask, and be with us and be with each other, because these are significant aspects of mission that we're exploring in this webinar. So with that, again, welcome to the webinar, and we're going to go over several items. Megan will lead us off with opening prayer. We'll do conference highlights, the themes, and then the extraordinary month of mission, reconciliation, animation, and a few announcements. So with that, Megan, if you would lead us with prayer.
Certainly. So let's begin as we begin all things, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
A reading from the Gospel according to Luke. Now that very day, 2 of them were going to a village 7 miles from Jerusalem called Emmaus, and they were conversing about all the things that had occurred. And it happened that while they were conversing and debating, Jesus himself drew near and walked with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. And he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, how slow of heart, to believe all that the prophets spoke. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all the scriptures. As they approached the village to which they were going, he gave the impression that he was going on farther. But they urged him, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening and the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them, and it happened that, while he was with them at table, he took bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. With that their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, but he vanished from their sight. Then they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the scriptures to us?" So they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem, where they found gathered together the 11 and those with them who were saying, "The Lord has truly been raised and has appeared to Simon." Then the 2 recounted what had taken place on the way and how he was made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Lord Jesus, the one who was made known through the breaking of the bread, we ask you to guide our dialogue this afternoon. Stay with us. Help us to accompany others on their journey. May we encounter one another with joy and love, and in so doing, encounter you. Open our eyes and inflame our hearts for the mission in the world. Empower us with your Spirit to seek reconciliation, justice, and peace, and to go out to proclaim the good news to all. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Megan, thank you very much. Okay, so we just wanted to spend a little bit of time on the highlights of the 2018 conference. Christine, what would be a highlight for you?
I think for me, it was, as one of the facilitators, it was amazing to see the diversity in the room. There was, and diversity in sense of experience. There were veterans that had been doing mission overseas for years. There are also people that hadn't done any mission other than maybe even a short-term mission of a hop into a country. So the diversity was pretty nice as far as experience, but it made it challenging as one of the facilitators of the conference.
Right. Yeah. What about you, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I noted that the theme of the conference was encounter, and I really appreciated the multiple ways that we were able to kind of, have dialogue, go back and forth, encounter one another at the tables and on the wall. Really, the guiding questions stayed with me as a kind of a way of continuing that experience of encounter. What did I hear that resonated with my experience or heart, but challenged or disrupted my understanding? And then what questions or wonderings are provoked? Those have been really helpful questions going forward from the conference as well.
Good, good. Roberto, what about you?
Well, like Christine, I was very struck by the wide diversity of experience and the willingness that everyone there had to share that experience. Those with less experience were hungry to take what was being shared as well as sharing their own. But then complement to that is the breakout sessions, which really gave us a chance to really kind of delve deeper into one topic and focus on something that was a little closer to our hearts. So I thought the combination of breadth of experience and then opportunities to focus, those are the two big highlights for me.
Thanks, Roberto. Yeah, I was, well, of course, very, very grateful for the hospitality of the Archdiocese of Boston, but also I was really moved by Father Stephen Dudek's presentation. He really kind of looked at mission from a new perspective, and I thought that was really encouraging and enriching as well. We do would like to invite you, if you would like to, in the Q&A, just say a word or two about any highlights for you from the conference. Feel free to do that. As you're doing that, I'm going to move on just to give a little summary of the evaluations. We did send out evaluations, and we got a very high response rate, 63%, and people liked the conference on a whole, gave 80+%. You can see how the keynotes were evaluated. The process was also evaluated very high, as well as the table conversations. The other thing that was very interesting to me is the age. 48% of us that were there were 60 or over. Only 13% were under 40 years old. So we clearly have a challenge with engaging our young adults. 66% of the people that were there were foreign missionaries, and of them, 60% of them were foreign missionaries for over 5 years. And people didn't really respond to the gender question. But they did give us some clues as to what they're looking for the future conferences. As you can see, in terms of conference by year, people like the idea of every 2 years. The regional gatherings has to do with regional gatherings when there is not an annual conference. So they're in favor of that. They reaffirm our standard format of 2 nights and 3 days. And the last one was shift to the weekdays. That was really an interesting response, because about a third say yes, third say no, and a third say I don't care. So that's where people are at with the conferences. So when you have a chance, share what you're thinking about the conferences. We'll see what kind of response we have so far. I'm shifting to the next themes. Here we go. We have, okay, no responses to that question at this point. So we'll move on. So the 6 themes, Christine's going to start us off with the listening session, and then we'll work through this listing of the themes as you see on this screen. So Christine, why don't you go ahead and introduce us to the listening sessions? Remind us what happened.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to let you guys know that Evan Cuthbert, the executive director of Rostro de Cristo, was really on the conference planning team, and he was the one who actually came up with the idea of having these listening sessions. Now, the purpose was really twofold. Really to allow time to be alone and think about what was heard and to share thoughts in facilitated places. But also, secondly, the listening sessions were designed to collect the wisdom of everybody that was heard and shared in order to build a vision for the possible way forward for the USCMA. So it was really, if you take that and then you put it into the theme of the conference of encounter, Evan's question was, well, then how do we encounter each other? How do we build a process that we're encountering each other, that we're allowing time to share, and we're allowing time to reflect when we need it? So that's really the overview of why we chose the listening sessions moving forward. Okay, next slide. So the listening process in itself. The process worked like this. Each table had a small Post-it notes all over it. And after each keynote and after each workshop, we invited people to write on the Post-it notes and answer the following 3 questions. What resonated with you? What challenged you? What questions or wonderings were provoked? So we asked them then to go over to the ballroom wall, and we had put a butcher block that we called the graffiti or reflection wall, and people were posting notes up the entire 3 days. So it was great. After every keynote, after every workshop, people were posting what they heard, what challenged, what resonated. So we got a lot of feedback immediately from each talk that what happened. Okay, next part. Now, once that happened and we saw all these reflections on the wall, on the last day, we pulled all the Post-it notes down and put them into theme categories, which are listed here. So we picked the top 7 most popular themes. In other words, all the Post-it notes were stacked pretty high for these particular categories. So you can see mutuality versus white savior, racial justice, and privileged power. We actually enfolded that into one group at a table. They were actually divided into mutuality versus white savior, racial justice, and then power privilege was a separate topic. We combined it all. The second one, how do I tell my mission story or preach mission? That was a really said over and over again on the Post-it notes. And the third one, mission formation for and with young adults and youth. That was a big one too. And as you can see, just by who came to the conference, that was a field that we, as Don had said, we'd love to be able to work on more. The fourth one, mission identity and baptismal call, the courage to live mission. That was pretty heavy too. And it was again based on if you're a returned missionary or you're someone who has never done it, how do I live out my call on a daily level? The fifth one was networking and forming a mission community. That was really key. There's a lot of great mission groups that are out there, but some feel alone and some are or in a diocese and you still feel alone. So it was really a huge theme that came out. Number 6, mission as justice education and solidarity building. That went hand in hand in almost every comment about justice with solidarity. And last, how the sexual abuse crisis impacts my work. That was a really key thing, and I'll talk about that in a second. What we did was then the conference committee and Evan identified experienced facilitators, and we pulled them together for a micro talk and training and got them caught up on what we're trying to achieve. So then we had all those table conversation topics on the tables. We let people choose which table they want to go to. And then the facilitators and note takers really use these 3 questions to fine tune and really structure the conversation. So the first one, what struck a chord with you, or what was a priority for you on this table topic? Number 2, how do you want to continue to talk about this? And number 3, what suggestions do you have to support each other on this particular topic? Now, we won't be sharing anything about this sex abuse crisis impacting our work. There were no notes taken on that table for discretionary reasons. And it was a very difficult conversation, and we thank the facilitators for that. That was really difficult table, but we will not be sharing on the outcomes of that conversation. So with that, we are going to start. Roberto, Megan, and I will be sharing on the summary of these tabletop discussions. Anybody want to jump in and add anything to our listening process, what I just described?
Just one of the things I just wanted to highlight was that this was woven throughout the entire conference, if you remember. So there was a pause after each keynote where people had a chance to do their reflection and had some table conversation, and that really kind of percolated all of these ideas, which then could be really do a deep dive in on Saturday morning. So it was a great process, and very grateful to Evan and Christine for not only creating the process, but facilitating the process.
Thanks.
Okay, no responses to that. Let's move on then. As Christine said, what we're going to do is turn the floor over to you, Megan, on the question of the mission identity and baptismal call.
Yeah, so Don sent to each of us the notes from all the table conversations, and also even the wall information as well, for us to be able to look at and pull out themes. So kind of broke this down into two topics: why this topic, or two ways of understanding the topic, why this is significant, and then ideas for moving forward. So for mission identity and baptismal call, and why this topic was significant for the folks, it was two tables that discussed this topic. Talking about the challenges for why mission identity and baptismal call is significant. It seemed like for folks, they observed that mission sometimes can be an unclear topic, or somehow might be objectionable for some folks. And that kind of broke down into a couple different kind of subtopics there. Some of the people on the table said that they observe people in the pews sometimes are unsure of the need or even the desire to share their faith. And maybe their faith isn't fully formed, so they're not sure what they're going to be sharing. So that really creates some issues, challenges there. And there still is that thinking. I know we've been working on this since the Second Vatican Council, but of thinking of missionaries are those people over there, they go far away, and this is a certain kind of way of life that most of us don't participate in. And it was reflected at the table at one point that it will require a big paradigm shift for some folks to adjust that thinking, and so that's a challenge. As well, the history of mission, the cross and the sword, colonization came up in the tables as well as a challenge here. Mission might be something some folks have a negative connotation with. And lastly, it was mentioned, and it often is, that the catechesis and formation materials either don't talk about mission or very little, or in a way that's not helpful for the kind of work that we do. It was even mentioned, of course, that pastors as well, they're not always formed as missionaries themselves, so that can be a challenge. In terms of opportunities, mission identity and baptismal call, this is fundamental to our faith. This is something that is so core, in many ways, be in the catechesis and formation materials. It's not just a task, it's not just a program, it's a way of being, it's a way of life. And so this is something that's a great opportunity there, that our identity is so fundamental to who we are as followers of Christ. It was mentioned that baptism, being a calling, has responsibilities, which can be empowering to people, because it's one thing to say, you're now part of this community and now we're going to support you, but you also have a responsibility. You have responsibilities of your own to also serve others, and you have something that you can offer the larger church. So that's empowering. And lastly, in terms of opportunities, mission and baptism are about the reign of God, about building right relationships, restoring the world and the dignity of all. So this is something that's a great opportunity, that it's very positive, it's so core to who we are as Christians, as Catholics, and the ultimate goal is something that's inspiring. So moving forward on the ideas for moving forward, one idea that came up was that we really want to try to have a consistent message when it comes to mission identity. And so how can we send that message out? One idea was that we would, in terms of so many of us are involved with mission appeals over the summer, those at the diocese and those who are actually making the appeals, that maybe that's a place where we can have a common message around mission identity, so that this paradigm shift can happen. As well, there was a suggestion that we might convene groups of those involved with mission work at the diocesan level, offer retreats or maybe formation events. The conversation about seminarians and clergy came up at the table. So ideas about offering formation or chances for conversations, so that clergy and seminarians will have a chance to talk about their own personal relationship and engagement and experience of Jesus, so that maybe they'll be more empowered to be sharing their faith as well. You think that they'd know that. And then an idea about liturgy. It was mentioned, we want liturgy to be transformational, not transactional. And I think that really comes down to making it mission-oriented. That will help get this message out. It was suggested that we have people who not just talking about mission, but really experiencing it. So we're really trying to make sure that mission is understood as at the home and not just something that you do far away. And lastly, there were some ideas about how USCMA may be able to help. These webinars and other kinds of gatherings, especially regional gatherings, was in hope that we might be able to make that more available to a wider audience. It was suggested that we make intentional invitations to young people and to Latinas in particular. Those are two groups that we want to try and empower more, to be more engaged with. And lastly, and I guess this is one of the other topics that was discussed, but that members of USCMA might seek opportunities to collaborate, accompany one another, and mentor those who might be newer to mission.
Great. Christine, thank you very much. Again, if you have any comments or questions, you feel free to put those in the question box. Just to move on, we'd like to move to the next, which is Roberto. Who's going to be talking about telling the story and preaching mission. Roberto?
Thank you, Don. Okay, so there was a common theme to most of the comments, most of the insights, and that is the communal nature of mission work. That we coexist and that we are all missionaries by our baptism. It seems as coexistence and being missionaries by our baptism is obvious, but I think it's something we forget to keep at the top of our mind when we're thinking about storytelling. So I think they say that remember that all of us are in this together gives us sort of the impetus to tell our stories. The other challenge is how we get people to embrace that missionary mandate. Simply that we know that we're all missionaries by our baptism doesn't mean that every baptized Catholic knows the same thing. And you start by telling your own story. How did you come to your missionary vocation? How did you encounter your first missionary opportunity? Stories from your mission experience. And then invite others to tell their story. And you might be talking to people who have never been on mission, but you invite them to tell their story of where they are in their spiritual life. But the idea being stories beget stories. And remember always to relate those stories to Scripture. And that's a lot easier to do than you might think. You don't have to relate your story to a particular Bible story, but remember that just with our opening prayer for this webinar, we hear about the road to Emmaus. That was Jesus being a missionary and then sending others on mission, which he had been doing his whole ministry. When you're telling your story, they found that it's best to highlight the commonality that we have with people in missions. One thing that was discussed was that there is this very much a perceptual difference that they are the missionaries from the first world and the people in mission territories from the third world, and they go in expecting this culture clash and expecting there to be, challenges and misunderstandings, and they're almost like going in with a sort of a girded against the obstacles. Find the commonality. Find the commonality, the universality that we all share as human beings and children of God, and put that into your stories. And don't make the stories all about the poverty of the people in the mission territories. You know, there's poverty relief and then there's evangelization, and the two overlap, but mission is more about evangelization. And the material poverty of the people in mission countries, that's just the circumstance. That's the setting of your story. It's not the antagonist of your story. That's not the villain to be vanquished. The villain to be vanquished is spiritual poverty, spiritual indifference, those that don't know or haven't fully encountered Christ. That's the story you want to tell, is how you bring people to Christ and how you grow closer to Christ. Rather than the wells you dug, the houses you built, or the people you fed. The next slide. The other major topic of conversation at the table was, of course, the MCP. After storytelling, fundraising is the next thing on everyone's mind. So using stories for the MCP, the mission appeal, start every appeal with a story. Someone suggested a song. That might be for the particularly brave. But present yourself as a parishioner, or present yourself to the parishioners as their ambassador to the mission. So you're not someone who's standing up there talking about an experience that you alone have had, but that you're their representative to the missions. Present yourself as someone, say, you are not going on mission. If you can't go on mission, I'll be your representative. Let me be the representative to the missions for you. So that it's not just the money they're putting in the collection basket, but after you share your story from the pulpit, talk with them in the vestibule. I know I've done that. After a mission appeal, I always stay and hang out in the vestibule after Mass, and at least 2 or 3 people will come up and tell me a story that they had in mission work, on a short-term mission trip they had, a short-term mission trip that their children went on in high school, or just how the story I told affected them. So offering to be their ambassador is an invitation for them to share their story. And then offer to tell the story that they tell you, share that with other missionaries, and let them know you're going to do that. Secondly, and this is more logistically, just always remember to know your diocesan policy before you give your MCP appeal. Every diocese is different. Every pastor is different. You may not be given, if you're a layperson giving a mission appeal, you may not have a whole lot of time to tell your story, so make it succinct. And then bring supporting materials, but ask the pastor first. And then combine your scheduling of an appeal with an offer to talk at the schools or the high school as well, or the CCD programs. Combine your mission appeal with a sort of a presence throughout the week, if possible. And then give them your contact info so you're available year-round so that you can tell your continuing story. They also brought up that the MCP is not a competition. Sometimes it feels like mission offices are in competition with CRS or Catholic Charities or any number of other worthy organizations. Remember that we're not in competition. We're all on the same team. It feels like we're competing for the same dollars, but we're really just all trying to share the same spiritual space. And when we do that, the money will come. And then have a website. Most mission organizations and dioceses have a website, but put your stories on there. Mission stories, not just information about where to donate, but stories about what the mission is about. There was also talk about, finally, the need for the Pontifical Mission Societies, the national office. What can they do for missionaries? What have they done? There was a little bit of criticism about missio.org, that the resources there are difficult to find on their website, and then a plea to the USCMA to sort of be the liaison between the missionaries in the field and the Pontifical Mission Societies in New York. That's something that I think that can be explored as we go. But if the USCMA wants to take on that role, that's something that can be talked about. But that was definitely one of the consensuses at the table.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. This is back to you, Megan. This is on the youth and young adults.
Yeah, so this is a topic that had 2 tables as well. It was very popular. And in fact, I was one of the note takers at the table talking about this. Again, we're going to talk about why it's significant first, and then the ideas moving forward a little later. So I broke this down into some challenges and opportunities. Initially, the biggest thing that came up was, young people have lost interest in their faith, in the church. And there were a couple of different ways that came out. A question was asked at one of the tables: how do we enter into the lives of young people? And I kind of interpret that to mean that we're kind of out of step with young people these days. You mentioned about the age who attended the conference alone. And so there's a little bit of wondering and not knowing about what young people's lives are like. It was also asked at a table, are young people being included in decision making? So it could be that young people are feeling they're not heard or not valued in the church or in their communities. It's also mentioned that there's a sense of an us versus them mentality, an idea that the church is still thinking about obligation and rule following, and that young people might respond better to a sense of mercy and accompaniment in the church. And so that was a challenge in terms of trying to engage more young people. It's also mentioned that it is difficult to work with Catholic schools and religious ed programs. Folks talked about, we wish we could get engaged with more, but every time we've tried to reach out, we don't get a very good response. So that was a challenge. As well, it was discussed briefly at one of the tables about USCMA, that the history of even this association was as mainly serving lifelong missionaries. And so there's a shift going on now to try to talk more about short-term mission, and we've been working at it. But that is a bit of a challenge too, because of that history. But the opportunities are, number one, people are hungry for mission. This was mentioned many different ways at both tables. That young people are interested and involved in justice and service, care for creation and diversity. These are all issues that young people care about, are engaged in, but they don't always think of the church first in terms of getting involved with those things. So it's an opportunity, but it may have a little bit of a challenge there. And then also it was discussed that young people returning from short-term mission, whether a week or 2 weeks or longer, they come back with a lot of energy, a lot of ideas, a lot of excitement. Sometimes they have a little trouble finding conversation partners and ways to get engaged since they've returned, but that energy is key. And I think that my own experience anyway, I think that's real evangelization that people want to share, but they get a little frustrated. So moving on to the next slide for moving forward. One suggestion made was that we want to make mission formation more experiential and a part of everyday life. This is a way of sort of saying that, again, to break that understanding that mission is for certain people, those people. Somebody mentioned this idea of little missions. I don't know where it came from, but in the notes I saw it, that this could be something that you do at home, something that they could actually start very small. It could just be in terms of tasks or spirituality for young persons. And that as the child grows up, that their missions become a little bigger and bigger, and then they're able eventually to take on something a little bit more, program size. Making mission more experiential. People also suggested it shouldn't just be a mission experience, but a mission relationship. And that it's something that you go and then come back, but then that folks from where you went come and visit you, and that there's an ongoing conversation and relationship that's growing. Another idea was that in terms of trying to get to know young people and young adults, that we might walk with young people. Somebody reflected at one of the tables that the person who's older than a young adult said that they remembered when they were young that they were spoiled by being given so much attention by their youth minister, and that's really ultimately what led them to the work they do now. And so attention is just such a big thing, and listening as well. Listening, giving somebody your full attention, to take them seriously, and that's a really great way to walk with young people. It was also suggested that we let students lead the experience. So if you're working with especially teens, but I suppose any age, that there's a suggestion that instead of informing them of what the plan is, to let them make some decisions in that. Another idea, as especially was discussed, vocation work, authenticity, that we be honest about the imperfections of our lives, the journeys that led us to where we are at, and times when we've felt a grief or sorrow or anger, our humanity, and to really tell those stories of encounter with all their imperfections. So, and lastly, one other idea for moving forward is that USCMA could help by developing more ways for keeping the mission experience alive when somebody has returned, especially in terms of short-term mission, and maybe geared toward young people. And then lastly, it was suggested that if we're trying to intentionally invite young people, that we might engage with colleges, universities, youth groups, young adult ministries, especially in terms of like gatherings or conferences, that we would intentionally make an invitation and seek to build those relationships.
Megan, thank you very much. Just taking a quick, we do have a question that's popped up. Kelly Underwood, she did not attend the conference. She's 27 and has been a missionary for 5 years. Decent number of young adults are serving in the field. A significant percentage of our long-term missionaries come from those who have had the opportunity to go on a short-term mission trip. It is interesting to note that we have many more single women young adult missionaries than single men. So that's a really good observation, that there is a tendency towards young women being involved in this. And the question, of course, is how do we begin to engage the young men? So we can noodle that as we are moving on. We do want to have Christine kind of tease apart this whole question of racial justice, privilege, power, and mutuality. That was clearly one of the themes that resonated with the young adults that were at the conference, even though there was only a small percentage of them. Christine?
Thank you. So what I want to do is first ask if there's anybody in the participation on this webinar. If you've been on this, in this table, please tell Dawn, because I want to ask a few questions for clarification. But within this, what was significant, going on that same question, that people said it was multi-layered, that it's a lived experience. And I think that is teased out in saying that it's pervasive. It's in everything. It's in cultural groups, social groups, economic understandings. It's everywhere. And that's how it's multi-layered. But it is a lived experience. Unless you understand what it's like, it's a little bit difficult to understand what is racial injustice, what is racial inequality. So those are things that came up. In addition to this, when we're talking about mutuality and white power, the last idea here, short-term and long-term mission, what is the actual understanding of the needs of both the sending and the receiving team? Is it actually mutual, or is one side doing all the work and the other side not getting anything from it? So that came up many times during this conversation. Can you move forward, please?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, thank you. All right, so ideas for moving forward. There were several, and they are all overlapped each other. Develop education to give people lived experience of racial injustice. I think they were indicating some resources out there, but I think the idea was for all of us to research that and share resources. this one came forward in different layers. Learn to speak truth to power. Whether you're a missionary in the United States or a missionary overseas, how do you do that? What does that look like? And maybe some training on that. The other idea was to be a servant leader or a minister from a position of service. Again, talking about power. How do we really be that servant leader or transformational leader? The other thing that came up over and over was language. Language that we use is important with regard to using skin tone, and that's directly from the notes. And that is really difficult, and people were saying there's a fear on how to talk about this. But it was important to be careful of the words we use when we use them. And last was training on mutuality, short-term and long-term mission, that those relationships around mutuality are built over time. There's no other way to ensure mutuality except for to build and understand that takes time. So if anybody was on this table, I invite you to share any other thoughts of your experience.
Not seeing anything cropping up in the Q&A. Why don't we just go ahead and,
okay, thank you.
And move forward. This now leads us to Roberto and the question of forming mission communities. Roberto.
Thank you. So forming mission communities, the first question that came up was, why is this a priority? And it seems to be a priority because there's no recognition of the universal call to live mission. So the mission communities, and we're talking at the parish level, are a way to do that, an invitation, give people a format to be able to live their mission identity. One of the concerns brought up is that the only people that seem to have a shared vision of mission are the people in the diocesan mission office. And so it's hard to form a mission community when there is such a very small part of the diocesan structure is thinking about mission, and then trying to get that to the number of parishes throughout your diocese is a bit of a challenge. Especially because, in the next point, most parish councils, there are parishes that are very mission-oriented and parishes that are less, but it always seems to be an addendum to parish life and not a central focus. It's one of many activities you can get involved in at the parish rather than part of what the parish does or what the parish is. One example is that the MCP collection just becomes a blur, part of the blur of second collections. There's at least 15 second collections per year, and the MCP is just one of those 15. In my own experience, I know I've been doing the MCP now for 5 years, and when I talk to my own fellow parishioners and mention the mission collection, they don't know what I'm talking about. Even though they have seen and given to the Mission Appeal collection every year for the past at least 5 and more, because it was going on before my time. But again, it just blends into the background. Mm-hmm. Another challenge in forming mission communities with a shared vision is that the groups that form have their own vision and their own agenda. So the topic of what is the vision of mission becomes very fragmented, and that's something that I think we can address as a community. Mission is not integral to our baptismal identity at the parish level. That's just I think a reiteration of the main point that it's a parish addendum if it's there at all. We always, every year since I started doing this, we talk about how to get mission into the Catholic school curriculum. The big challenge being they are already overloaded with state requirements. So how do we do that? How do we get mission to be part of the catechetical education in our Catholic schools? Next. So that comes to the next point of they asked, how do we form people under one umbrella that encompasses laity and clergy? And one of the suggestions was that all mission work should work towards a theology of mission, a central theme. And I think a lot of mission groups, they go out with the idea of helping people, but they can't articulate what the theological aspect of their mission is beyond that Christ told us to do this. Another suggestion is to create networking networks so that we can recruit missionaries, so that people know where to go and who to talk to if they're interested in learning more about mission work. And USCMA members can share their background as missionaries and translate that into resources. Someone suggested that the USCMA could offer online. I think the USCMA already does that quite a bit, but I think they were talking about even a more organized, systemic way of taking missionaries' experiences and then putting them into some kind of resource that could be downloaded. And then again, talk turned again to the Pontifical Mission Societies. They're not getting left off the hook. They asked how can they be of service on a structural level, as opposed to just a sort of a philosophical level. And there was a feeling that the PMS needs to be reinvented. Another topic was the differing theologies of pre versus post Vatican II concepts of mission, clergy driven versus lay driven. The idea being that pre Vatican II, I think as someone said before, that missionaries were those people. It was the clergy, they were taking care of it. Our job as the laity was just to support them with our prayers and donations. Now it is very much lay-driven, and so that's why you have such a diversity of philosophies of mission, diversity of methods of mission. So the question becomes, how do we make that transition into one vision? They talked about twinning, which is pretty much what a mission community at the parish level does. They twin with another parish or diocese. The challenge is that there needs to be better communication between the twinning parishes, better training for the sending and receiving parishes, and a more of a cultural anthropological education for mission formators. This would be for the clergy who are forming, seminarians or in mission vocation. That there should be a little more education at the seminary level on anthropology and cultural studies to be part and parcel of missionary formation. The Texas Mission Council model was very popular, and that was suggested as something to go off of. And then again, they asked what really should be the role of the USCMA when it comes to twinning. Where do we fit in supporting the twinning efforts of parishes and dioceses?
Great. Roberto, thank you very much. We did get a question that came in as you were talking, Roberto, about not only the question of mission theology, but also the spirituality of mission. Did you get a sense of that from this conversation?
I got the sense that I believe a lot of people, they use theology and spirituality interchangeably, which is really not correct. And I think a lot of people, they felt that the spirituality was very strong but undefined. And I think that's where the theology comes in. How do we really articulate our mission spirituality? Because right now, I think for a lot of people, it's just an impulse. Mm-hmm. And so I think they were looking for more of a definition, and that's where they were focusing on theology.
Good. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next conversation, mission as education, justice education, and solidarity building. This is Christine. Christine?
Thank you. All right, what was significant in this group? Well, there was a lot of people saying there were organizations that have justice education materials, but it's not consolidated. So the USCMA, Missio, Education for Justice, you name it, there's a ton of education out there. But I think here it was looking at some frustration written in the notes about it's not in one place. So that was significant. The other is that mission offices are more than just vehicles to raise money. It seems to be a understanding that that's what a mission office does. But it's more than that. It's a place of education and experience transformation. There seemed to be frustration that it wasn't understood that that's what that was, that mission offices were a place for education.
Good.
So what ideas came forward really about justice, education, and solidarity building? Obviously, a place to share what was learned through mistakes. That was actually really important, I think. We talk about our successes, but the group was at this table was suggesting, let's take a deeper look at the mistakes, because that's actually where the wisdom comes from. And if we can share that with the other missionaries, then that would be a fantastic idea. So that came forward. Next is that, as it had already been suggested, the USCMA to have regional meetings for missionaries and their partners. And adjacent to that, the USCMA widening their tent to partners across sectors like healthcare, advocacy, social justice offices, educators, a wider area to work in. And then have a conference every 2 to 3 years, as you saw in the stats. Every 2 years seems to be what people want, and create those relationships across sectors in the meantime. So that's all I have. Any other questions from the group panelists or anybody who was at that table?
Good question. None have come up. So Christine, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So a lot of very rich conversations that took place. And again, what we want to do is build on this. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be shaping these insights, these issues, into survey questions. And those survey questions will then go back out to the entire USCMA membership so that we can begin to program webinars that begin to address those particular issues. And it's really very touching to me that there's a real depth of question that's being raised here about mission and how we can be better missionaries in this day and age, really building bridges of solidarity among and between peoples. We do want to just mention a couple of things. One of the things that we've been invited is the extraordinary month of mission and the Synod on the Amazon. That's an invitation from the Holy Father. And we have some website resources that you can check out. And the question is whether or not we want to do some digging into this a little bit deeper with webinars, perhaps gathering people, religious communities, directors of mission, mission directors in dioceses to gather and exchange ideas, maybe in April, September, sharing plans, and then November kind of sharing highlights of next steps. So that will be one of the questions on the survey. Another is reconciliation. And just a word about this. This was a board movement, a board moment, really. 2 years ago, when the board was meeting after the conference in San Antonio, there was this real kind of movement among the board about this question of reconciliation. And as I recall it, it was like a gut-wrenching groaning for truth and healing here in our country. So one of the things that you'll hear about when people talk about mission is you'll hear about the mission field. And the reality is that the United States of America continues to be a mission field. And at least among the board members that was at this meeting, there was like a gut-wrenching groaning for truth and healing in our own country. And reconciliation had something to do with that. And so we've inviting people to a year of study, prayer, dialogue, and discernment on that issue. The way I think about it is we're just going to take a deep dive into this. We're just going to kind of this is kind of a leap of faith. And one idea is a virtual book club. There's 2 books out there that we can look at. I'm sure there are others. The 2 that have surfaced so far is Premeditated Mercy by Joe Nassel and The Ministry of Reconciliation by Bob Strider. Also, we could do webinars, we could do immersions, and we could do collaborative events. Again, these opportunities, this idea would be on in the survey, and we want to hear back from all of our members about this. And what does that look like? Well, do I need personal healing and reconciliation? What's restorative justice? Can citizens and immigrants be reconciled? Blacks, whites, women, men, conservative, liberals. You get the idea. There's all this polarization in our society. How can reconciliation as a component of mission help the healing process? That's what we want to explore over the course of the next year and probably beyond. And then the idea of animation gatherings. What we're really feeling is, we need to have missionaries meet each other. And so could there be a local gathering? And Roberto, could you just take a moment and share a little bit about the Arlington Wine and Cheese idea?
Sure. So we're actually coming up on the 1-year anniversary of that wine and cheese event. And it came out of, in the previous fall, I was calling every parish to find out what the missionary, sort of spirituality or missionary activity of that parish was. And I found that there were fully 1/3 of the parishes in our diocese have some form of international missionary ministry. And about half the people I spoke to asked me if we as the mission office had a database of people who work in mission in the diocese. And so that led me to sort of convene a networking event for missionaries in the diocese. As the lure, I served wine and cheese and invited everyone that I had spoken to over the phone to come, and a great many of them did. Dawn was gracious enough to give a keynote speech, which everyone really appreciated. And then most of the time was spent networking. I introduced myself and the mission office and what we were available for, and then the missionaries, they just sipped wine and got to know each other. And I do believe there were some partnerships that were formed. Be very interesting. I was just thinking of emailing that list and find out where they are now 1 year later and schedule the next one. But it was a great start to getting the missionaries of the diocese to start finding out who else is doing what they're doing.
Right. Thank you, Roberto. So that's the idea in a nutshell. And so again, in the survey, we're going to be asking people, because this is a way, again, we have to kind of stretch ourselves out to see all the different ways people are involved in mission. And I think we will be surprised to find out how many people are involved in mission in some way. I want you to take a look at this picture. So we have this lone individual here, and that's the whole idea of animation, is to move from the lone individual to a network, to identify and to see others in mission. So we're not in isolation, we are connected, we just don't know each other yet. And so we're trying to create, through animation gatherings, a way of getting to know each other. Okay, so this brings us kind of to the end. Any final thoughts? Christine, any final thoughts as we've kind of gone through this webinar? Anything that you'd like to highlight?
It was just very encouraging, the whole conference, and the openness to do a different sort of structure to get all this encounter with each other. So I just say good job to the planning team and to the board for encouraging and allowing this sort of process to occur during the conference that brought all this information forward. So thank you.
Great. Megan.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged. I know sometimes these challenges and the things that we bring up that seem to be barriers might be something that would kind of scare some people. I think that actually it's a sign that we're alive and we're struggling with these things in the world. It is a complicated, big world, diverse world that we live in, but I think it's a good sign that we're asking these questions because we're trying to be better missionaries and we're engaged in the real world as it is.
Thank you. Roberto.
Yeah, just reiterate Megan said, and the the need to asking these questions. And I think we always need to be aware that these questions are only going to lead to more questions. The church has been around for 2,000 years. We are still discerning God's revelation to us. These questions regarding mission and our identity with mission and how we go about mission, that's just part of the journey we're on, the end of which only God knows. But I think people should not be discouraged by the questions we're asking now or be afraid of the questions that will come up later. And just know that there will be no end to the questions in the foreseeable future, but that is exactly how we journey closer to God.
Amen to that. In terms of questions, again, we're going to be doing a follow-up to this webinar, a program survey that will go to all the members. So please look forward to that. Matter of fact, if God willing, I'm going to try and have it out by Valentine's Day, kind of share the love by answering the program survey question. The other thing that we want to do in March and April, USCMA used to do a study of all the missionaries, and we've been able to identify some of the advanced technologies, data collection technologies. So we're going to try and do that again, and all it's going to ask of us is to share as widely as possible an email with a link to a questionnaire, and then each person who sees themselves as a missionary can fill it out. That'll help give us a sense of all the folks that are in mission. That's going to be very, very helpful. Not only will it be helpful to us who are in mission, but it's also going to be helpful to our bishops who don't really have a clear sense of the breadth and depth of mission in this country today. And of course, it'll be helpful to the Pontifical Mission Societies and the Holy Father. So I think that is really an important step. And then finally, we're going to be tossing around the idea of doing a Pentecost pledge. What would it be like for us? Again, this is going to be an opportunity that we can, if you like the idea, can participate in. It'll be on the survey. What would it be like to kind of really promote a Pentecost pledge where a person says, yes, I will indeed pursue the call to mission that I've received in my baptism. So just some ideas that we want to begin to explore with you, and those will all be in the survey. So, of course, respond to the survey. Finally, there are ways to contact us. So if you have some burning ideas or suggestions, feel free to contact us. You see our website where you could find out more information about, like, for example, the Extraordinary Month of Mission, and then there's my contact information as well as my email. Okay, that brings us to an end of our conversation. Any final? Nope, no final Q&As. But I do want to pause and thank Christine, Megan, and Roberto for being our panelists this afternoon. This session has been recorded, so feel free to, we'll put it up on our website, and we'll let other people know that it's out there so they can kind of see the opportunities, the possibilities, as well as the depth of conversation that's been happening. With that, thank you very much. Please keep all missionaries, lay, religious, and ordained, in your prayers, and keep the people of God, all 7.7 billion of us, in your heart. God bless, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.